The ink on the divorce papers was still wet, glistening under the crystal chandelier of the Caldwell estate. Outside, the Boston snow fell softly, painting a picture of a perfect Christmas, but inside the dining room, the air was suffocating. Patricia Caldwell, Ilara's mother-in-law, smirked over her wine glass, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Finally," she whispered, loud enough for the guests to hear. "We can flush the trash out of this family." Her husband, Liam, the man Ilara had loved for 3 years, didn't even look up from his plate. He let his mother destroy her. Ilara wiped a single tear from her cheek, capped the pen, and stood up. They thought they were discarding a penniless orphan. They had no idea that the signature she just gave them was worth billions. They didn't know that her father was Arthur Sterling, the shadow owner of half the city. And by the time they found out, it would be too late. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times, the sound echoing through the cavernous halls of the Caldwell Manor like a death knell. For most people, Christmas Eve in Beacon Hill, Boston, was a time of magic. The cobblestone streets were dusted with fresh snow, gas lamps flickered with a warm, nostalgic glow, and the scent of pine and cinnamon wafted from the multi-million-dollar brownstones. But for Ilara Vance, this house was not a home. It was a prison constructed of mahogany and old money judgment. "Ilara!" The shriek came from the dining room. It was Patricia. It was always Patricia. Ilara wiped her hands on her apron, a ragged thing she'd been wearing since 5 that morning, and hurried out of the kitchen. Her hands were red and chapped from scrubbing the silver, peeling 5 pounds of potatoes, and prepping the glaze for the ham. The Caldwells had a full staff, of course. They employed a chef, 2 maids, and a groundskeeper. But on Christmas Eve, Patricia had given them all the night off. "Family requires sacrifice," she had told Ilara, with a thin, reptilian smile earlier that day. "Since you brought nothing into this marriage, Ilara, the least you can do is serve the family that put a roof over your head." Ilara walked into the dining room. The table was set for 12, exquisite bone china, polished silver, and a centerpiece of winter roses that likely cost more than a Honda Civic. Patricia was standing by the fireplace, adjusting a garland. She didn't turn around when Ilara entered. She just spoke to the fire. "The roast is dry. I haven't taken it out of the oven yet, Patricia," Ilara said softly. "The timer hasn't gone off." She spun around, her eyes narrowing. She was a beautiful woman in a terrifying way. 60 years old, maintained by the best surgeons in Switzerland, wearing a vintage Chanel dress that fit her like armor. "Don't talk back to me," she snapped. "I can smell it. It smells like mediocrity, just like everything you touch." Ilara bit the inside of her cheek, tasting copper. "I'll check it immediately." "And for heaven's sake, go change," Patricia said, waving a hand at her dismissively. "You look like a scullery maid. Jessica is arriving in 20 minutes. I won't have you embarrassing Liam in front of her." Jessica. The name made Ilara's stomach twist. Jessica Thorne was the daughter of a senator. She was blonde, statuesque, attended Vassar, and, according to Patricia, was the woman Liam should have married. She was also Liam's ex-girlfriend, and for some reason, she was the guest of honor at their Christmas dinner. Ilara retreated to the kitchen, leaning against the cold granite island for a moment to catch her breath. "Why do you stay?" The question haunted her. She stayed because she loved Liam, or at least the Liam she met 3 years ago. She had met him at a coffee shop near the public library. She was wearing a hoodie and reading a beat-up paperback. He was charming, funny, and seemed so different from the stuffy world he came from. He didn't know who she was. To him, she was just Ilara, a freelance graphic designer, struggling to make rent. He didn't know that Elara Vance was an alias. He didn't know that her legal name was Elara Sterling. He didn't know that her father, Arthur Sterling, was the CEO of Sterling Global, a conglomerate that owned shipping lines, tech firms, and half the real estate in Manhattan. She had run away from that life because she wanted to be loved for her, not for the Sterling billions. She wanted a life where people didn't bow when she entered a room. When Liam proposed, she thought she had found it. He didn't care about money, he said. He just wanted them to be together. But the moment he brought her home to Beacon Hill, everything changed. Patricia got her claws into him. She controlled the family trust, she controlled the house, and slowly, she began to control Liam. Over 3 years, she eroded his spine until he was nothing more than a puppet, and Elara was the punching bag she used to test her strength. The back door opened, letting in a gust of freezing wind. Liam walked in, shaking snow off his cashmere coat. He looked tired. "Liam," Elara said, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. She walked over to him. "You're home early." He didn't kiss her. He didn't even smile. He just hung his coat up and avoided her eyes. "Mother called. She said you were running behind on dinner." The hope died. "I've been cooking since dawn, Liam. I'm doing everything alone." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't start, Elara. Not tonight. Jessica is coming, and Mother is already on edge. Just try to be invisible, okay? Don't cause a scene." "Be invisible," she whispered. "I'm your wife, Liam." He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't love. It was annoyance. "Look, just get changed. Wear that grey dress Mother bought you. The modest one." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the humming of the refrigerator and the smell of the roast that Patricia claimed was already ruined. Elara went upstairs to the small guest room where she had been sleeping for the past 3 months. Patricia had insisted that Liam needed his rest for business, and Elara tossed and turned too much. She put on the grey dress. It was shapeless, dull, and made of a scratchy wool that made her itch. It was a dress designed to make a woman disappear. She looked in the mirror. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her face devoid of makeup, because Patricia said makeup on her looked cheap. She looked exhausted. She looked defeated. But as she stared at her reflection, something flickered behind her eyes, a memory of her father. A Sterling never bows, Elara. We wait. We assess. And when we strike, we don't miss. She hadn't spoken to her father in 4 years. He was a hard man, a brutal negotiator, and she hated him for it. But tonight, standing in this cold house, surrounded by people who despised her, she wished she had just an ounce of his ruthlessness. Elara took a deep breath, smoothed the grey wool, and headed downstairs. The doorbell rang. The wolves were here. The dining room was a theatre of cruelty, and Elara was the unwilling star. The guests had arrived. Aside from Patricia and Liam, there were the Mortons, wealthy banking moguls who looked at Elara like she was a stain on the carpet, and of course Jessica Thorne. Jessica was radiant. She wore a crimson silk gown that clung to her curves, diamonds dripping from her ears that caught the candlelight with every turn of her head. She sat directly to Liam's right, her hand casually resting on his forearm every time she laughed. Elara was seated at the far end of the table, near the kitchen door. The draft from the hallway hit her back every time one of the hired servers, who arrived only to serve the food she had cooked, walked in. "This roast is actually quite decent," Mr. Morton grunted, slicing into the beef. "Who's your caterer, Patricia?" Patricia smiled, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. "Oh, we didn't cater tonight, Charles. Elara insisted on cooking. You know how she is. She prefers domestic tasks. It's how she was raised, I suppose. Laughter rippled around the table. It was a subtle dig at her background, or what they thought was her background. They thought she was raised in a trailer park, because that's the lie she told Liam to hide her wealth. Well, Jessica chimed in, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. It's good to have hobbies. I barely have time to breathe these days. The senator and I have been flying between DC and Paris for the climate summit. Liam, do you remember that trip we took to Paris? The little bistro near the Seine? Liam smiled, a genuine smile Ilara hadn't seen directed at her in months. I remember. The muscles were incredible. We should go back, Jessica said, her eyes locking onto his. The firm is looking to expand into European markets, isn't it? My father could open some doors for you. Ilara gripped her fork so hard, her knuckles turned white. She was sitting right there. They were planning a romantic business trip right in front of her. Liam, she said, her voice cutting through their nostalgia. Please pass the salt. The table went silent. Jessica looked at her, as if a speaking dog had just interrupted a symphony. Oh, Ilara, Jessica said with a pitying smile. I didn't see you there behind the centerpiece. Liam, darling, pass her the salt. Liam slid the salt shaker down the mahogany table without looking at his wife. The dinner dragged on for 2 hours. Every course was accompanied by a story of the good old days between Liam and Jessica, or a commentary by Patricia on the importance of breeding and legacy. Finally, the dessert was cleared. The mood in the room shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with an anticipation Ilara didn't understand. Patricia tapped her spoon against her crystal champagne flute. Cling, cling, cling. If I could have everyone's attention, Patricia announced, standing up. She looked regal, commanding, and utterly terrifying. I have a special Christmas announcement, a gift, really, for my son. Liam looked up, confused. Mother? Patricia reached under her chair and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Ilara. It stopped right in front of her plate. Open it, Ilara, she commanded. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Liam. He was staring at the tablecloth, his face pale. He knew what was in there. Liam, she whispered. Just open it, he mumbled, his voice weak. She opened the clasp with trembling fingers and pulled out the document. The header was in bold, black letters. Petition for dissolution of marriage divorce papers. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. The room started to spin. What is this? It's your exit strategy, Patricia said coldly. We've been patient, Ilara. We gave you 3 years to try and fit into this world, to try and be a worthy partner for Liam. But let's be honest, you are an anchor around his neck. I don't understand, she stammered, looking at Liam. Liam, tell her we're happy. Liam finally looked up. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. We aren't happy, Ilara. We haven't been for a long time. My company, the Caldwell Group, is in trouble. We need capital. We need connections. He glanced at Jessica. The realization hit Ilara like a physical blow. You're leaving me for her? For money? It's not just money, Jessica interjected smoothly, sipping her wine. It's about compatibility, Ilara. Liam needs a power partner, someone who understands his world. You're very good at cooking roast beef. This is cruel, Ilara said, her voice rising. Doing this on Christmas Eve, in front of strangers. It's necessary, Patricia snapped. Now, look at the terms. They are generous. You get $50,000 a cash, enough to start over in whatever backwater town you crawled out of. In exchange, you sign tonight, you leave tonight, and you never speak to the press about this family." "And if I refuse?" she asked, staring her down. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes hard as diamonds. "Then we destroy you. I have lawyers who will drag this out for years. We will paint you as an unstable, gold-digging adulteress. I will make sure you never get a job in this city again. You will leave here with nothing. Not even your dignity." Ilara looked around the table. The Mortons were studying their fingernails. Jessica was smirking. Liam was looking at the wall. They thought she was trapped. They thought she was scared. Slowly, a strange calm washed over her. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning anger. It was the sterling blood waking up. She looked at the papers. $50,000. It was an insult. She spent more than that on her father's birthday gift 4 years ago. "You want me to sign?" she asked, her voice steady. "Now," Patricia said. She pulled a gold Mont Blanc pen from her purse and slid it across the table. Ilara picked up the pen. It felt heavy. "Liam," she said, one last time, "if I sign this, there is no going back. You lose me forever." "Sign it, Ilara," he whispered. "It's for the best." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him for what he was. He wasn't the sweet man in the coffee shop. He was a coward, a weak, spineless boy afraid of his mother and greedy for status. "Okay," she said. She flipped to the last page, signature of petitioner. She didn't hesitate. She pressed the pen to the paper. But as she wrote, she didn't feel like she was losing a husband. She felt like she was shedding a skin. She signed the paper with a flourish. Ilara A. Vance. She capped the pen and tossed it back to Patricia. It skidded across the table and hit her wine glass with a sharp clink. "Done," she said. "Good," Patricia said, snatching the papers. "The car is waiting outside. Your bags are already packed." Ilara stood up. She felt taller. "I don't need your car, and I don't need your money." "Don't be dramatic," Jessica laughed. "You'll need every cent." Ilara walked to the head of the table, standing directly between Patricia and Liam. "You speak a lot about legacy, Patricia," she said, her voice ringing clear in the silent room. "About breeding, about who belongs in this world and who doesn't." "Go away, Ilara," Liam said, covering his face with his hands. "I'm going," she said. "But before I go, I want you to remember this moment. Remember the night you sold your wife for a political connection." She reached into the pocket of her grey dress and pulled out her phone. It had been off for 3 years. She held the power button. The screen lit up. "What are you doing?" Patricia demanded. "Making a call," she said. She dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered, a voice that terrified Wall Street. "Daddy," she said. The table went deadly silent. Patricia froze. "Ilara." The voice on the other end cracked with emotion. "Ilara, is that you? My God, where have you been?" "I'm in Boston, Daddy," she said, her eyes locking on Patricia's. "I'm ready to come home. And Daddy, I need you to buy something for me. Anything, sweetheart. Name it." "The Caldwell Group," she said. "I want you to buy it, and then I want you to burn it to the ground." She hung up the phone and looked at the bloodless faces around the table. "Merry Christmas," she said. And then she walked out. The silence in the dining room didn't break. It shattered. Ilara's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she walked toward the foyer, the sound rhythmically mocking the stunned statues she left behind. "Wait!" It was Liam. She heard his chair scrape violently against the floor. She didn't stop. She reached the hallway, grabbing her heavy wool coat from the rack, the only coat she owned, bought at a thrift store 3 winters ago. "Ilara, stop!" Liam grabbed her arm just as she reached the heavy oak front door. She spun around, ripping her arm from his grasp with a force that surprised them both. "Do not touch me," she hissed. "You lost that right the moment you slid that pen across the table." Liam looked pale, his eyes darting between her and the dining room, where his mother and Jessica were undoubtedly straining to listen. "Who was that on the phone?" "Daddy. You told me your father was a shift manager at a factory in Ohio. You told me he died." "I told you what you needed to hear to love me for me, Liam," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. And clearly, even a factory worker's daughter wasn't good enough for the Caldwells. "You're bluffing," he said, a nervous laugh bubbling in his throat. "You're trying to scare Mother. That phone call, it was a performance. You don't have anyone coming. You're going to walk out into the snow and realize you have nowhere to go. Open the door, Liam. No, not until you admit you're lying. Come back inside, apologize to Jessica and Mother, and maybe we can renegotiate the settlement. I can get you 10,000 more." She looked at him with profound pity. He was negotiating for pennies while standing on a gold mine he had just blown up. "Open the door." Before he could answer, a blinding white light flooded through the frosted glass of the entryway. High beams, powerful ones. Then came the sound, not the rumble of a taxi or an Uber, but the deep, guttural purr of a precision-engineered engine. Then another. Then a third. Liam frowned, stepping back. "Who is that?" Ilara turned the lock and threw the door open. The bitter wind whipped her hair, but she didn't feel the cold. She only felt the heat of victory. Parked in the circular driveway, blocking the Caldwells' modest Mercedes and Jessica's Lexus, was a convoy, a lead security SUV, followed by a sleek, midnight blue Maybach and a trailing SUV. The cars were immaculate, gleaming under the street lamps like predatory beasts. Men in dark suits were already pouring out of the SUVs. They moved with military precision, earpieces coiled behind their ears. One of them, a giant of a man with a scar running down his jaw, marched up the steps. She recognized him immediately. "Marcus," she breathed. Marcus had been her father's head of security since she was a child. He used to drive her to ballet practice. He stopped 3 feet from her and bowed his head, a gesture of respect no one in this house had shown her in 3 years. "Miss Sterling," Marcus said, his voice deep and steady. "Your father sent the jet. It's waiting at Logan. We have a secure line to him in the car." Behind her, she heard a gasp. Patricia had come to the door, with Jessica and the Mortons trailing behind her. They were huddled in the doorway, clutching their wine glasses, staring at the spectacle in the driveway. "Sterling," Liam whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. "Did he say—" "Sterling." Ilara turned back to them one last time. The snow swirled around her, creating a halo in the porch lights. "You asked about my background, Patricia," she said, raising her voice over the wind. "You were right to be suspicious. I didn't come from nothing. My father is Arthur Sterling." The name hit them like a physical shockwave. Mr. Morton dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the porch, red wine staining the snow like blood. "Arthur Sterling," Mr. Morton choked out. "The chairman of Sterling Global? The man who just bought the Boston Harbor port?" "The very same," she said coolly. "And as of 5 minutes ago, he is very, very unhappy with how his daughter has been treated." Patricia looked like she was having a stroke. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Jessica, usually so composed, looked terrified. She knew what Sterling Global could do. They didn't just buy companies, they erased them. Ilara looked at Liam. He was staring at the Maybach, then back at her, the realization of what he had thrown away crashing down on him. "Elara," he stammered, reaching out a hand. "Elara, wait. We didn't know. If we had known—" "That's exactly the point, Liam," she said softly. "You didn't know. And you treated me like garbage because you thought I was weak. You thought I was poor. You only respect money. Well, now you're going to see what real money looks like." Marcus stepped forward, placing a massive hand on Liam's chest, pushing him back effortlessly. "Step back, sir. Do not approach Miss Sterling." She turned and walked down the steps. Marcus opened the back door of the Maybach. The interior was warm, smelling of rich leather and safety. She paused before getting in and looked up at the second-floor window, the window of the guest room where she had cried herself to sleep for months. "Goodbye, Liam," she said. "I'll see you in court." She slid into the car. The heavy door thudded shut, sealing out the cold, the snow, and the Caldwells. As the convoy pulled away, Elara looked in the rearview mirror. Liam was standing in the snow in his dress shoes, snow soaking his socks, watching the taillights of his future disappear into the night. Patricia was screaming something at him, striking his arm. She leaned back into the heated seat, and finally, for the first time that night, she let the tears fall. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. The nightmare was over. The war had just begun. The flight to New York was a blur of champagne and silence. Elara didn't want to talk. She just watched the city lights of Boston fade beneath the clouds, imagining the chaos she had left behind. We landed at a private airstrip in Teterboro, New Jersey, where a helicopter was waiting to take them directly to the roof of the Sterling Tower in Manhattan. Her father was waiting. When the elevator doors opened into the penthouse, a triplex that floated above Central Park, he was standing by the fireplace. He looked older than she remembered. His hair was whiter, his shoulders slightly more stooped, but the eyes were the same, steel grey. Intelligent. Dangerous. "Elara," he said. She ran to him. She collapsed into his arms, burying her face in his velvet smoking jacket. She smelled his cologne, sandalwood and tobacco, and she felt like a little girl again. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. You were right. You were right about everything." He held her tight, his hand stroking her hair. "Hush now. You wanted to find your own way. You have a good heart, Elara, a stubborn, foolish, wonderful heart. But they broke it." He pulled back, holding her at arm's length. His expression hardened, the father disappearing and the CEO emerging. "And for that, they will pay." "I signed the divorce papers," she said, wiping her eyes. "Good," he nodded. "Then we are free to act. Sit down. We have work to do." He led her to the massive dining table. It was covered in files, blueprints, and tablets. 3 lawyers were already there, working silently on laptops. It was 2 a.m. on Christmas morning, and the Sterling legal team was at war. "This is Mr. Henderson, our chief counsel," her father said, gesturing to a sharp-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses. "Tell her what we found." Henderson looked up. "Good evening, Ms. Sterling. Or should I say, Ms. Vance? We've already filed the motion to annul the divorce agreement you signed tonight on grounds of coercion and duress, but that's just a formality. The real interest is the Caldwell Group." He spun a tablet around to face her. It showed a complex web of financial charts. They were all red. "The Caldwell Group is hemorrhaging money," Henderson explained. "They are over-leveraged in real estate. They took out massive loans to cover their losses in the tech sector. Their primary creditor is Beacon Hill Trust." "And who owns Beacon Hill Trust?" she asked, a suspicion forming in her mind. Her father smiled, a cold, shark-like grin. "We do. As of an hour ago. I bought the controlling stake from a panicked board of directors in London who were happy to unload the bad debt. Ilara's jaw dropped. You own their debt? I own their mortgage, their business loans, and the lien on their precious manor house, her father said. Technically, Ilara, you are now your mother-in-law's landlord. A dark laugh escaped her lips. She's going to lose her mind. That is the appetizer, her father said. Now for the main course. I want you to destroy them, Ilara, but I want you to do it face to face. They need to know who beat them. He pressed a button on the intercom. Send in the stylists. The double doors opened, and a team of 4 people swarmed in, carrying racks of clothes, makeup cases, and jewelry boxes. You look like a victim, her father said, surveying her grey wool dress. Tomorrow morning, at 9 a.m., the Caldwell Group is holding an emergency board meeting to address the rumors of a hostile takeover. You will be walking into that boardroom as the new majority shareholder. I can't, she said, looking down at her chipped nails. I'm not ready. I'm just a graphic designer. Her father grabbed her chin and lifted her head. You are a sterling. You have my blood. You have my fire. You just forgot how to use it because you were too busy serving roast beef to ungrateful snobs. Tonight, we bury Ilara Vance. Tomorrow, Ilara Sterling is reborn. The transformation took 6 hours. Her hair was cut and dyed, the dull brown replaced with a rich, glossy chestnut, styled in sharp power waves. Her skin was prepped, primed, and polished until she glowed. The makeup was applied with architectural precision, sharp contour, bold brows, and a lip color that was the exact shade of dried blood. Then came the clothes. Gone was the shapeless grey wool. In its place was an Armani power suit in stark white, tailored to within an inch of its life. Underneath, a black silk camisole. On her feet, 6-inch Louboutins with red soles that looked like warnings. And finally, the jewelry. Her father opened a safe and pulled out the sterling diamond, a necklace she hadn't seen since her mother died. A 10-carat solitaire that hung heavy and cold against her throat. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. The sad, tired girl from the kitchen was gone. Staring back at her was a predator. Ready? Her father asked, standing behind her in the mirror. Ready, she said. Her voice sounded different, deeper, calmer. The helicopter is waiting, he said. We're going back to Boston. The boardroom of the Caldwell Group was on the 40th floor, overlooking the snow-covered city. The mood in the room was funeral. Liam sat at the head of the table, looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his tie loosened. Patricia sat next to him, looking unusually frazzled. Her hair was perfect, but her hands were shaking as she held her coffee cup. Jessica Thorne was there too, technically as legal counsel, but mostly to hold Liam's hand. This is ridiculous, Patricia snapped, slamming her hand on the table. Who is buying the shares? Why can't we trace the shell company? We're trying, Mother, Liam said, rubbing his temples. The broker is anonymous, but they've acquired 51% of the voting stock overnight. It's impossible, but they did it. It has to be a competitor, Jessica surmised. Maybe Verify, or TechCore. It doesn't matter who it is, Mr. Morton, who was on the board, said grimly. They called this meeting. They're here. The heavy double doors to the boardroom swung open. The room went silent. Arthur Sterling walked in first. The air seemed to leave the room. Everyone knew Arthur Sterling. He was a myth, a legend, a titan of industry. Patricia gasped. Arthur! Sterling? Mr. Sterling? Liam stood up, knocking his chair over. We didn't know you were the interested party. This is an honor, sir. We can certainly discuss a merger. Sit down, boy, Arthur barked. He didn't even look at Liam. He walked to the side of the table and pulled out the chair at the head, the one opposite Liam. But he didn't sit. He gestured to the door. I am not the chairman of the new acquiring entity, Arthur announced. I am merely the advisor. Please welcome the new CEO and owner of the Caldwell Group. He looked at Elara as she stepped through the doorway. The clicking of her heels was the only sound in the world. She walked into the room, the white suit blazing against the dark wood of the boardroom. She stopped at the head of the table and placed her hands on the leather chair. She looked at Liam. His mouth was open, his eyes wide with shock and horror. She looked at Patricia. She was clutching her chest, her face grey. She looked at Jessica. She looked like she wanted to vomit. "Merry Christmas, family," Elara said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I hope you enjoyed the roast." She sat down in the chairman's chair, spun it around to face them, and interlaced her fingers. "Now," she said, "let's talk about severance packages." The air in the boardroom was so thick with tension, it felt like breathing through wool. Arthur Sterling leaned back in his chair, watching the scene with the detached amusement of a lion watching a gazelle try to negotiate with a trap. "Elara," Liam's voice was a cracked whisper. He was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles white. You bought the company?" "I didn't buy it, Liam," she corrected him, smoothing the lapel of her white Armani jacket. "My father's holding company, Phoenix Ventures, acquired the debt. I simply stepped in to manage the asset, an asset that, according to these financial reports, you have driven into the ground." She tossed a thick binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud in front of Patricia. Patricia stared at the binder as if it were a bomb. "This is illegal," she hissed, her eyes darting around the room to the other board members. "You cannot just walk in here and take over. We have bylaws. We have a board structure." "We had a board structure," Elara said calmly. "But if you turn to page 4, you'll see that the terms of your emergency loan from Beacon Hill Trust, which my father now owns, contain a change of control clause. In the event of default, the creditor has the right to replace executive leadership immediately. You defaulted 3 months ago, Patricia. You just hid it." A gasp went around the table. The other board members, old men in grey suits who had blindly followed the Caldwell name, looked at Patricia with sudden accusation. "You told us the loan was renegotiated," Mr. Morton shouted. "She lied," Elara said simply, "just like she lied about me." Jessica Thorne stood up. She was trembling, but she tried to muster her usual courtroom arrogance. "Elara, this is a clear conflict of interest. You are in the middle of a divorce proceeding with the CEO. You cannot objectively manage this company. I will file an injunction within the hour." Elara turned her gaze to Jessica. She didn't blink. "Sit down, Jessica," she said softly. "I am the corporate counsel for this firm," she snapped. "I don't take orders from a graphic designer." "You were the corporate counsel," Elara corrected. "But as of 9:05 a.m. this morning, your contract has been terminated for gross negligence and malpractice." Jessica's jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" "You signed off on the financial statements that hid the default," Elara said, pointing to the binder. "That is fraud, Jessica. My lawyers are already drafting a complaint to the Bar Association. If you leave now, you might be able to save your license. If you stay, I'll make sure you never practice law in this country again." Jessica looked at her, then at Liam. She saw a sinking ship. "Liam," she said, her voice wavering, I have to go make some calls." "Jessica!" Liam looked at her, betrayed. You're leaving? I can't be disbarred for you, Liam, she shrieked. She grabbed her briefcase and fled the room, the heavy doors swinging shut behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Liam looked destroyed. The woman he had left Ilara for, the power partner he needed, had abandoned him at the first sign of trouble. Ilara turned back to the table. Now, let's talk about the rest of you. She stood up and walked slowly around the table, trailing her hand along the leather chairs. Mr. Morton, she said, you've been voting yourself bonuses while the company pension fund dried up. You're fired. Get out. Morton turned purple, sputtered an indignation, and then, seeing the security guards her father had brought, grabbed his things and scuttled out. She went down the line. Fired. 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 Within 5 minutes, the room was empty, except for Ilara, her father, Liam, and Patricia. Patricia was still sitting there, frozen. She looked small. The power she projected at dinner last night had evaporated. You can't do this, she whispered. This company. My grandfather built this company. It is the Caldwell legacy. Your legacy is built on lies, Patricia, Ilara said, leaning over the table to look her in the eye. I spent last night going through your personal accounts. You've been siphoning company money to pay for that house, for your parties, for your image. You're not just bankrupt. You're a thief. Patricia flinched. And you? She turned to Liam. He was slumped in his chair, head in his hands. Ilara, he moaned. Why didn't you tell me? If I had known you were a sterling. Stop! She cut him off, her voice sharp. Don't you dare finish that sentence. If you had known, what? You would have loved me. You would have treated me with respect. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. I was under pressure. Mother said we needed the connection with Jessica. I did it for the family. You did it because you are weak, she said. You had a choice, Liam. Every day for 3 years, you had a choice to stand up for your wife. And every day, you chose her. She pointed at Patricia. So now, she can save you. She walked back to the head of the table and pressed the intercom button. Security, please escort Mr. Caldwell and Mrs. Caldwell out of the building and revoke their access passes immediately. Ilara, please! Liam stood up, reaching for her. Where are we supposed to go? We don't have jobs. You froze the accounts. I hear the factory in Ohio is hiring, she said coldly. Shift work, minimum wage. It builds character. Isn't that what you thought my father did? 2 large security guards entered the room. Get your hands off me, Patricia screamed as a guard took her arm. I am Patricia Caldwell. I own this city. Not anymore, Ilara said. As they were dragged out, Liam looked back at her one last time. His eyes were full of regret, fear, and a dawning realization of the magnitude of his mistake. When the doors closed, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. Her father stood up and walked over to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. How does it feel? He asked. She looked at the empty chairs. She looked at the city of Boston, spread out beneath her, covered in snow. It feels like a start, she said. But we're not done yet. Oh? Her father raised an eyebrow. They still have the house, she said. The house where they treated me like a slave. I want it. Her father smiled. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. I thought you might say that, he said. I had legal execute the foreclosure clause on the estate this morning. The eviction notice is being served, right about now. The snow had turned into a blizzard by the time Ilara pulled up to the Caldwell estate in her father's SUV. She wasn't driving a Maybach this time. She was driving a black Range Rover, looking every bit the executioner she had become. The scene in the driveway was chaotic. 2 moving trucks were parked on the lawn, their wheels churning up the pristine snow. Men in coveralls were hauling furniture out of the front door, antiques, paintings, the dining room table where she had signed the papers less than 24 hours ago. Patricia was standing on the porch, wrapped in a fur coat, screaming at a sheriff's deputy. "You cannot do this. This is my home. I have lived here for 40 years. Ma'am, the bank owns the deed," the deputy was saying patiently. The foreclosure was triggered by the default on the business loans. The house was collateral. You have to vacate the premises. Liam was sitting on a Louis Vuitton trunk in the driveway, snow piling up on his shoulders. He looked catatonic. Ilara parked the car and stepped out. The wind howled, biting at her face, but the adrenaline kept her warm. Patricia saw her. She stopped screaming at the deputy and ran down the steps, stumbling in the snow. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a gloved finger at her. "You devil! You did this! You planned this!" "I didn't plan anything, Patricia," she said, calmly, stopping a few feet from her. "I just reacted. You set the table. I just cleared it." She lunged at Ilara, her face twisted in a rictus of hate. "I took you in. I gave you a home." Marcus, her father's security chief, stepped in front of Ilara, blocking her path with his massive frame. Patricia bounced off him and fell into the snow. She lay there, sobbing, her dignity completely gone. "My house, my beautiful house." Liam finally stood up. He walked over to them slowly, like a man walking to the gallows. "Ilara," he said. His voice was hollow. "Is this enough? Have you hurt us enough?" She looked at him, the man she had cooked for, cleaned for, cried for. "It's not about hurting you, Liam," she said. "It's about balancing the scales. You took 3 years of my life. You took my self-worth. You tried to take my dignity on Christmas Eve. This—" She gestured to the movers hauling out a sofa. "This is just stuff. You can buy new stuff, but you can't buy back the time you stole from me." "I loved you," he said, tears freezing on his cheeks. "In the beginning, before the stress, before the debt. I did love you." "No, Liam," she shook her head. "You loved having someone to look down on. You loved having a wife who you thought had nowhere else to go. That's not love. That's ownership." A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It was Jessica Thorne. Liam's face lit up with a flicker of hope. "Jessica, you came back." Jessica didn't unlock the doors. She just shouted through the window. "Liam, my father called. The FBI is raiding the firm's archives because of what Ilara said. I can't be seen with you. Don't call me." She rolled up the window and the car sped off, fishtailing in the snow. Liam watched her go, his arms falling to his sides. The last illusion was shattered. "She never loved you either," Ilara said softly. The moving men came out carrying a large portrait, the oil painting of Patricia that used to hang above the fireplace. They carelessly leaned it against a tree, and it slid down into a slush puddle. Patricia let out a wail of despair. "You have until 5 p.m. to take your personal effects," the deputy announced. "After that, the locks are being changed." "Where will we go?" Liam asked, looking at Ilara. He sounded like a child. "Ilara, seriously. We have no money. The accounts are frozen. We have nowhere." She reached into her purse. For a second, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe he thought she was going to give him a check. Maybe he thought she would show mercy. She pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the recipe card for the Christmas roast glaze. The one Patricia had told her smelled like mediocrity. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "It's a good recipe. If you find a kitchen, you can make it. It's cheap." He stared at the paper in his hand. "Goodbye, Liam," she said. She turned and walked toward the house. "Where are you going?" he called out. "Inside," she said, without turning back. "It's my house now, and I have some redecorating to do." She walked up the steps, past the sobbing Patricia, past the bewildered deputy, and into the foyer. The house was cold. The furniture was mostly gone. It echoed with emptiness. She walked into the dining room. The table was gone, but the ghost of last night remained. She could still see them sitting there, laughing at her. She walked to the kitchen. The pots and pans were still in the sink, unwashed from the dinner she had prepared. She picked up a sponge. For a second, habit took over, and she almost started to scrub. Then she stopped. She dropped the sponge into the sink. "Never again," she whispered to the empty room. She walked out of the kitchen and headed for the stairs. She climbed to the second floor, bypassing the guest room she had been forced to sleep in. She walked straight to the master bedroom, Patricia's room. It was massive, with a balcony overlooking the estate. The movers hadn't touched the bed yet. It was covered in silk sheets. She walked to the balcony doors and threw them open. The cold air rushed in, cleansing the scent of Patricia's heavy perfume. Below, in the driveway, she saw two small figures walking down the long, snow-covered lane toward the main road. Liam was supporting his mother. They were carrying two suitcases. They looked like refugees in their own kingdom. She watched them until they disappeared around the bend, swallowed by the winter darkness. She was alone. She was a billionaire. She was powerful. But as the adrenaline faded, a strange hollowness settled in her chest. Revenge, she was learning, was a dish best served cold, but it didn't fill you up. Her phone buzzed. It was her father. "Is it done?" he asked. "It's done," she said. "They're gone." "Good. Come home, Ilara. We have the shareholder meeting in Tokyo next week. You need to prepare." "I'll be there," she said. She hung up. She looked out at the snow one last time. The war with the Caldwells was over. She had won. But standing in their empty, frozen house, she realized that the hardest part wasn't destroying her enemies. It was figuring out who Ilara Sterling was, now that she had nothing left to fight. She turned away from the window and walked out of the room, leaving the balcony doors open. Let the snow come in. Let it bury everything. 1 year. 365 days. That's how long it takes for the world to turn completely upside down. It was Christmas Eve again. But this time, Ilara wasn't scrubbing pots in a drafty kitchen in Boston. She was standing on the terrace of the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, holding a flute of vintage Krug, looking out at the glittering skyline of the city that now bowed to her. Inside the ballroom, the Sterling Global Christmas Charity Gala was in full swing. The elite of New York were there. Senators, tech moguls, film stars, all vying for a moment of her time. They called her the Golden Empress of Wall Street. They whispered about how she had taken a failing, mid-sized firm and turned it into a global powerhouse in under 6 months. She wore gold tonight, a custom Versace gown that shimmered like liquid bullion. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders. She wore the sterling diamond, but she didn't need it to prove her worth anymore. Hiding Ilara. She turned to see her father walking onto the terrace. He looked healthy, vibrant. The past year had revitalized him. "Just thinking, Daddy," she said, leaning against the stone railing, "about last year." "A lot has changed," he said, standing beside her. "You sold the Caldwell estate." "I did," she nodded. "I turned it into a shelter for women escaping domestic abuse. I thought it was fitting. That house needed to learn how to protect women, not destroy them." Her father chuckled. "And the Caldwell Group?" "Dismantled. We absorbed the viable assets into Sterling Tech. The rest, well, let's just say the brand is dead." She took a sip of champagne. It tasted like victory, but with a lingering note of melancholy. She hadn't dated anyone since Liam. She hadn't let anyone close. The armor she had built that night in the boardroom was effective, but it was heavy. "Ms. Sterling." A voice came from the doorway. It was a waiter, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He was keeping his head down, his posture slumped. "We need to clear the terrace for the fireworks display, ma'am," he mumbled. Ilara froze. She knew that voice. It was a voice that used to whisper, "I love you," in the dark. It was a voice that had told her to sign her life away for $50,000. "Liam," she whispered. The waiter stiffened. He slowly lifted his head. The shock hit her harder than she expected. Liam looked old. His hair was thinning, his face gaunt and lined with exhaustion. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting caterer's uniform. There was a stain on his collar. "Ilara," he breathed, his eyes widening as he took in her gown, the diamonds, the aura of power radiating off her. I didn't know this was your event. The agency just sent me to the Sterling Gala. I didn't make the connection." "You're working for a catering agency?" she asked, her voice devoid of malice, filled only with a strange curiosity. "It's a job," he said defensively, though his voice cracked. After everything happened, no one would hire me. The foreclosure ruined my credit. Mother is in a state-assisted living facility. She had a breakdown." "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and she meant it. She didn't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy. She just felt a distant pity, like watching a stranger struggle in the rain. Liam looked at the tray in his hands, then back at her. Tears welled up in his eyes. "You look beautiful, Ilara," he said softly. "You look like you were always meant to look." "I was always this person, Liam," she said. "You just never bothered to turn on the light to see me." He nodded, a tear escaping and tracking through the stubble on his cheek. "I know. I replay that night every day. The dinner, the papers. If I hadn't signed, if I had just stood up for you." "But you didn't," she said firmly. "And that's okay, because if you hadn't broken me, I wouldn't have built myself back up. You didn't destroy me, Liam. You forged me." The fireworks began. Great blooms of red and gold exploded over Central Park, illuminating the terrace in flashes of brilliance. "I have to go," Liam said, stepping back. "I can't be seen talking to the guests. It's against policy." He turned to leave, a broken man carrying a tray of crab cakes. "Liam!" she called out. He stopped, hope flickering in his eyes. "Yes?" "The glaze," she said. "For the roast. Did you ever make it?" He lowered his head. "No, I couldn't afford the ingredients." He walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the service entrance. She stood there for a long time, watching the fireworks. Her father put his arm around her. "Are you okay?" he asked. She took a deep breath of the cold, crisp winter air. She looked at the city lights, the symbol of the empire she now ruled. She thought of the girl in the grey wool dress, and she realized the girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, a woman who would never, ever bow again. "Yes, Daddy," she smiled, turning back to the party, to the music, to the future. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." And that, my friends, is the story of how Ilara Vance went from a silenced wife in a cold kitchen to the Golden Empress of New York. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who try to bury us don't realize we are seeds. Liam and Patricia thought money was the only power that mattered, but they forgot that true power comes from dignity, self-respect, and the courage to walk away when you are not valued. What would you have done if you were Ilara? Would you have forgiven Liam when you saw him working as a waiter? Or was his fate exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a debate going. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and rising from the ashes, please give this video a huge thumbs up and share it with a friend who needs a reminder of their own worth. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, remember, never let anyone treat you like an option when you are a priority. Merry Christmas.